Welcome back to the Real Estate Voice with Barb Schlinker, the weekly radio show that informs and educates you, entertains you as well, on how to buy or sell real estate with Barb Schlinker, the owner of Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. Barb, with many buyers facing competing offers when they buy homes, what are the top 8 things that sellers love to get from buyers in offers?
Well, Richard, it's pretty simple what sellers want. And I wanted to do more of a buyer facing one just because it's very frustrating for them right now, what's going on in the market, especially in the price ranges where they're having to compete, which is pretty much, oh gosh, all the way up to 800 sometimes, depending on the house, it could be more. I've got multiple offers I'm presenting tonight on a property priced at 825. So there are competing offers many times with homes. And the problem is their offers, they don't know what the other offers are. They cannot know that. I know somebody was trying to blow up my phone last week asking that. And then he did this. Check this out. So he used some kind of spy software to find the seller's phone number and called him and complained that I would not tell him how much the other offers were.
Your obligation again is to who?
To the seller.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be fair. I mean, how do I know anyway, it was crazy. So
it's amazing to me.
We did counter him, but then he wouldn't come up to a competing offer. So it was all for naught. But he said we were answering the phone. We just weren't answering his question because I cannot do that. So anyway, what most sellers want is the best price. Now, the reason why I say best is not necessarily the highest. They don't always take the highest price. They're looking at a couple of different things. And I help them make this decision. Things like the likelihood that it's definitely going to go through without any hiccups. Because sellers want to know everything's going to be fine, it's going to go through. Think about it. They've tied up their home with a buyer, right? They can't really accept any other offers once they accept that contract. Buyer has 6 or 8 options to bail out of the deal. The seller has essentially none, right? So they commit to this buyer, then they have to prepare to move to be out of the house on time. But the buyer could walk away towards the end to say, well, I don't like my loan, I'm moving on. It's very disruptive for people. So they want the least amount of hassle. And the problem is most agents kind of tend to just either be the messenger, or sometimes, like I mentioned in the last segment, they make these ridiculously high offers just to get a deal. And then they're hoping that the price will be walked back by the appraiser, and or they beat up the seller for concessions. Like I had one agent, pretty nice guy, but what he said to me was, my buyer paid $65,000 over asking price. Therefore, the seller should give them a new water heater, even though the water heater that was there was working just fine. And I said, well, just because you weren't the only buyer that offered that much. So in my opinion, your buyer's paying market value. So anyway, so this is what goes on once they go under contract. And the offer, basically, sometimes they will challenge when a seller gets an offer. We're hoping that they all come in at the same time. That way the seller can make an informed decision about which offer to choose. So if they take an offer that's way above similar sales, and we don't think an appraiser is going to support that price, I have to prepare the seller for that. I had one recently, Richard, that sold for $100,000 over asking price. It was kind of shocking to me. And we priced what I consider very realistically. And we got a buyer that basically just wanted to be in that neighborhood, loved the home. They're buying that home no matter what. And so their price was well above similar sales. And I prepared the seller. I said, look, let's do an estimated net sheet of it appraising at a lower price. It was still the best offer, and he ended up taking that, but it did appraise, it worked out fine. So that's great. But I have to manage expectations because nobody wants to be disappointed after you go under contract, and then you find out, oh, the buyer wants stuff, and you find out, oh, the appraisal came in low. It's just, it makes the whole experience not as fun as it was to begin with. So if you are thinking about making a move and you want somebody that really has your back and works towards your goals, that's what we do. We consider our sellers our clients, and we advocate for them. So give us a call at 719-301-3900. So let's talk about some of the top things sellers really love to get from buyers in offers. First one is to just waive the appraisal altogether. Now, you have to get the lender to accept that. And of course, if it's a cash offer, we don't need an appraisal. So that's a good thing. And have to worry about jumping through that one hoop. Another thing that sellers like to see is what they call an appraisal gap. So in this case, the buyer would have to have extra cash in excess of how much they're putting down, which isn't always realistic for everybody. But let's say the sales price is $500,000, right? But similar sales are $475,000. If a buyer comes in and offers $500,000 and they're willing to bring 25 extra to closing, if the appraiser doesn't think it's worth $500,000, that means it's going to sell for $500,000. So it's a really good assurance, a set of confidence that it's going to go through, and we don't have to worry about an appraisal. Let me give you an example. I've got one closing this week where the sales price is $575,000. The buyer offered a $20,000 appraisal guarantee. The appraiser did not think it was worth $575,000. He came in at a value at $565,000, but the closing price is still $575,000, and the buyer is bringing the difference to cash at closing. So that's a good thing. Another thing the sellers would love to get from buyers are inspection waivers. So the language in these gets really tricky. What a lot of the agents put in there are things like, well, the buyer will waive any repairs at a certain price, except for health and safety and plumbing and electrical.
Jeez.
So I read those provisions with a grain of salt, but sometimes they actually do put a provision in there that says, we will take this as is. Okay, so that's a good thing. Another thing sellers like to get is a relatively quick closing. We know most lenders are going to take 3 to 4 weeks right now to get to closing, and that's fine. But you don't want to guess at that. Call and ask, because sometimes the sellers will tell us when they want to move. They also like possession after closing. Now, this is why. It is possible a buyer may not close. It's a worse situation, but it's possible that they get all the way really, really close to the finish line, and for some reason they can't close. Okay, that's a nightmare if the seller has already moved out of the house. But if they haven't moved out of the house, then I guess you just get a new buyer and you move on. So if they have a little bit of time after closing to stay in possession, they know they're closed, they have their money. Sometimes sellers need that money in order to pay for moves. Moves are super expensive, especially out of state. You're going to spend $15,000 to $20,000 to pay a mover to get you out. The other thing that sellers love from buyers, of course, are cash offers, because they don't have to worry about a loan and an appraisal. Now, of course, it's not possible for most people. I understand that, but that is appealing to sellers for sure. Also, a high down payment. So anything above 20% down is basically gravy, right?
Right.
Anything above 20% down, basically, doesn't matter where it will appraise, it's extra. Whether or not the buyer is willing to bring extra if it doesn't appraise, but it does indicate a really strong borrower that has a much higher probability of their loan being approved. Now, just so you know, we have very few deals fall apart. It doesn't happen that often. If it does happen, it's just because the buyer typically changed their mind, not because of financing. So, it's not a big concern, but given other choices, they might want to have somebody that has a really, really strong down payment. And sellers want what I call certainty that the deal is going to go through, certainty that it's going to close. Okay. So I had one seller told me, we don't want to worry about the appraisal. And so we had two buyers at the same price. One buyer offered a $10,000 appraisal guarantee. The other buyer offered $30,000. Price was $550, the offer amount. However, the similar sales might have been maybe $525. So we really needed that appraisal guarantee to support the price of $550. But the buyer with the lower appraisal guarantee of $10,000 was putting, I think, $200,000 down. It was way above 20%. So they didn't really have to worry about an appraisal. So I reached out to the agent. I said, hey, what about this appraisal guarantee? Can you make it a little bit more? And she goes, oh, I sent you an email, separate email, not in the contract, that says that looks like the lender is just going to waive the appraisal altogether. I'm like, great, that moves you to the top of the line. So we countered her. The next morning, she came back and said, I don't like that appraisal guarantee. I think that because I put it in the contract that whatever it appraised at, the buyer was going to pay the difference. They weren't comfortable with that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we turned 7 other buyers away. So I went to the seller. I said, look, let's just hide this counter. Let's go back to all the buyers, have them make their best and highest by 5 o'clock. And what happened is the seller actually got 10,000 more from another buyer and a better buyer.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, those are the best things that you can give to a seller when you're making offers, and any combination of those would help. But you have to think, if you love the home, what is that price? What is that number in which that's your highest number? And if somebody else pays more than that, let them have it. Richard?
You're listening to Barb Schlinker, the real estate voice. Barb Has the Buyers. You can reach her there at barbhasthebuyers.com. Barb, time for the lightning round of some of your hot new listings. Tell us about them.
All right. Well, we've got one on a cute little condo in the satellite building, priced at $250, 411 Lakeside Drive. We have a fabulous home on 40 acres at 21065 Myers Road in the upper 3s. We've got a gorgeous 2-story in the Powers Corridor in the upper 4s on Laredo Ridge. Fabulous home with 2.5 acres on Vincent Drive, priced in the mid 8s. Amazing home on Mesa Road that has gorgeous views in the mid 7s. A spectacular kind of contemporary Colorado modern home backs to the golf course on 1450 Masters Drive, and a beautiful home in Pueblo on Siesta Way. And we've got a coming soon home that's priced in the low 300s on North Prospect. You don't want to miss that. Richard?
You've been listening to the Real Estate Voice. It airs every Saturday. And if you're thinking of making a move, call Barb at 719-301-3900 or visit barbhasthebuyers.com. You can also see replays of the show on Barb's YouTube channel, Barb Schlinker, Schlinker, or of course you can listen to podcasts. They're on all of the popular podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, many, many others. Thank you for listening this weekend, and to reach out to Barb, call 719-301-3900. Barb, great chatting with you. We'll talk again next weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.